All right, everybody. Thank you guys for waiting. I know we had a little bit of a late setup, but welcome to our weekly Sky update. This is our fifth week of us doing this. I've been on here on and off. Those of you guys who don't remember me, my name is Oliver. I think the last time I did a show was a good month ago. I am going to kind of talk about where we left off and then to continue forward. But first, I'm going to go ahead and introduce this to Chrissy, and she's going to go ahead and introduce this whole thing. So, Chrissy.
Okay, hey guys. So I'm Chrissy. I'm one of the console operators at the planetarium and also a mechanical engineering student at UNT. Um, so I'm also one of the presenters, but we switch off every week. So today Oliver's the presenter and he's going to be giving a tour of some constellations and other celestial objects that you can find in this week's sky. While also kind of giving a tour of Stellarium, the software that he's going to be using. So I'm also going to put a link in the comments if you want to download that. It is free. But we're doing these shows every Saturday at 2. And then after the Star Talk, we're also going to be doing like a Q&A. So if you have any questions, just go ahead and put those in the comments and I'll make sure that Oliver sees them. And since these shows are free, of course, we can't be in the planetarium doing shows, so we've lost our source of income. And we greatly appreciate any donations to the Sky Theater funds. I'll provide a list. Week we are giving away meteorites for anybody who donates $50 or more. But that's all I have. So I'm just going to go ahead and give it back to Oliver so he can start doing the start talk.
Cool. Thank you, Chrissy. Let me see this. Right. Okay, so like I said, last time I did this was about a month ago. So if you'll see here with our Stellarium page, and by the way, I will go over some quick things on Stellarium itself, but you'll see the date and time we have set for today at 22:04, so about 10:04 p.m. tonight. And we have the seconds going down are going up as well, so it's basically live. So maybe in 20 minutes you guys will see some difference, but possibly not. But let's go back to earlier this June and let's really take a note to the difference of this guy then. So let's say I did the first week, so I guess it was like June 7th around then. And I'm just going to go ahead and put up all the const. Oh, guess we can't do that, but we'll get a good idea of the ones that were on the ecliptic because I know for a fact these are the ones that we talked about. So some of this may already look familiar to you guys. There we go. So we did talk about the ones that were on this red line here. And if you guys remember, that's what we call the ecliptic. That is basically just the pathway that everything in our sky goes through. Basically like the sun, the moon, these special constellations here, and a few other things such as planets, which, spoiler alert, we will go into this time. So if we take a look at what was up back then, we have kind of Cancer over here with the two heads of Gemini popping up just behind this tree over here. So we have these that are kind of like in the beginning of our summer constellations. And sorry, let me backtrack. So I really want to get an idea of what we're looking at the sky, because it really is just a matter of perspective. Because obviously the sky can change depending on where you are in the world or what time of night it is. But then it's also going to change as you're looking at the sky, like even in an hour's time. So I really want to show how it's doing that so that we can get a good understanding of how that works so that let's say then when we are allowed to go back out when quarantine breaks, then we can get a good idea of how to look at the sky and read it without any of the tools that we have in front of us here. Because it does make it easy, but it really is good to get to a point where you fully truly understand the sky and just use this sort of as like a tool for that. So keep in mind, this is more or less what we had in the night sky back then. So remember, this is June 7th. So I'm going to go ahead and bring it back to today, about 20 days later. So when that happens, you'll see a few things. So the first thing is the moon. The moon was not previously in this spot. Right now, it is sitting just at the tail end of Virgo here. So in about a week's time, it should be in Leo. Um, so the moon is one thing that goes through our ecliptic line here. So if I were to go ahead and skip days ahead, oh, okay, it goes the opposite direction. If I were to skip days ahead, then it would go into Libra, later Ophiuchus here, and eventually it's going to traverse through all the different constellations that go onto this pathway. And that's something that will change about daily. And I'm going to go into the moon a little bit later because it's actually pretty interesting. But right now, let's focus on just the difference here. Another one is These constellations still are on this line, and Leo and Virgo, Libra, all these were here before, but now they've kind of moved down the line a little bit. And now Cancer, which was previously in Leo spot, is now hidden behind this tree. So that's happened in about a 3 week, 1 month time. So you can get a good idea that pretty soon these constellations will no longer be here. And so it will open up the stage for maybe the fall constellations and pretty soon after the winter constellations. So that should make sense. When you see Leo, Virgo, and Libra, um, Scorpio should be in here as well. Where are you? There we go. Yeah, so Scorpius, the last one here, those are the ones that I always think about when I think about the summer constellations. Scorpius especially could just be a bias of mine, but it's one that I think is very easy to spot. It's usually when I'm looking out in real life, showing people who want to learn about astronomy, this is a good one that I usually start with because it has a really good defined features. So obviously it's known because of its curved tail there. So that's one feature that we can distinguish. Another one would be this really bright star here, which it's a little bit hidden, but it's Antares, which is its alpha star. If you guys remember from my previous show, alpha star basically just means the brightest star in a constellation. So that is what that is. And then of course we have these three really bright stars that do touch the ecliptic there. And that's kind of where it opens up to like the Scorpius head. So that in mind, we have the tail, Antares, and then like the arrowheads here. And that is how you can distinguish Scorpius there. So again, that is a pretty popular summer constellation. And again, you guys will get the idea that as time goes on, these constellations will move through the sky. If we want to go ahead and do a sneak peek, let's say to December, then we're going to have a totally different group. We'll see Gemini and Cancer kind of start creeping back in because obviously spring and summer will arrive. But when I do that, you'll see some other things pop up here, right? So we have Uranus and Mars. That means that the planets can also come through this the ecliptic line as well. And in fact, we can actually see that starting to happen right now. So again, we're looking at the sky at about 10 p.m. So the planets that will be popping up right now, they are going to pop up a little bit later. Like you'll see Jupiter, for example, is starting to pop up above the horizon here. So let's go ahead and double click. And remember, double clicking centers on the object, so it makes it easy to zoom into, which is exactly what we're going to do here. So Jupiter is still on this ecliptic and it's popping up pretty close behind Sagittarius. So Sagittarius is the constellation that is just a little bit left of Scorpius. So that's part of the reason why I went over Scorpius 1, because it's really easy to spot, but also it's going to help us find these other objects here. So at where this tail is, you go a little bit more to the left, but staying to that same pathway of the ecliptic, then you'll find Sagittarius. Now, Sagittarius has a bunch of different features that people use to distinguish it and like know where it is. Me personally, I kind of think of Sagittarius as sort of like a teapot. So looking at my arrow here, you'll see right here on the left is kind of like the handle. This right here would be the spout, and of course this would be kind of like the lid. Now, if I were to go ahead and put on the art, doesn't exactly line up with what I see, right? Right here we have a centaur with a bow and arrow, the bow and arrow being kind of like the main part of the constellation here. But what I really want to drive home with this is really just, again, it's all a matter of perspective. When we're looking at the sky, obviously we don't have the option to just turn on the art of a constellation like in real life. So we have to use kind of our own clues. So when I go ahead and say that it looks like a teapot, that's just because those are the features that I find, so it makes it easy for me to spot in the sky. So just keep that in mind. There are different cultures that have ideas of what they are, but that doesn't mean that you have to stick with them. It is just something that really just boils down to tradition at this point. But now that we've talked a little bit about Sagittarius, we'll go a little bit more to the left here to Jupiter. And zooming in there, let's go ahead and look at some of what it really looks like, because that's another cool thing about Stellarium is that you can zoom into these things and they have actual photography that they've put in here. So you get a really cool image of Jupiter here, really detailed. You can see kind of like the different lines of the different gases making up its defining. We can kind of see it's a red storm right there, that red dot. Let me see if I speed up time. Oh, that's weird. It's centered on it. It shouldn't do that. All right, at this point, I'm just playing around with this, so excuse me with this. All right, but the point is though, you can go ahead and click on these far away objects. Obviously, they wouldn't be as close or as easy to see as some of like the stars, the constellations, but you can zoom in there. What's really cool is it's very accurate to what's going on in our night sky. So besides the fact of its position, you can also see some things that are tied to it. So as we know, most planets will also have moons. So those really bright dots that you guys are seeing there, I think as I'm zoomed in, it's trying to like escape from me. So that's what's going on there. But you'll see some of Jupiter's moons here. Now Jupiter is a really, really big planet, and it has a really strong gravitational pull because of that. So really what moons are just kind of think about them as like really big satellites that get caught into that gravitational that pull, and so they get caught in orbit. So because of that, and because of how big Jupiter is, it actually has a good amount of moons, I think above 70. There isn't an exact number though, because things will fly in and out of orbit all the time. And a lot of those moons are really small, but we really only care about the big, big ones. So some of these right here, we have Callisto, Ganymede, Io, and Europa. So these are actually very visible. If you look through a strong enough telescope and you zoom into, or you look at Jupiter, if you see them at the right time, you should be able to see kind of like not the shadow, the silhouette of the moons going through Jupiter. So really cool thing that you can see there. Obviously, we only have our one moon, but you can imagine just how cool it would look from another planet to view four moons big enough to be spotted like that. I'm actually zooming out to find Saturn, but we actually have a surprise visitor from Pluto. So why not go there? I think I clicked on it. There we go. So Pluto, of course, is very, very tiny. We still have a good amount of people who are very loyal to Pluto, who wish it were still a planet. Unfortunately, though, it is not a planet anymore. It has been donned the dwarf planets title. And wow, it is. What's going on here? There we go. This is what happens when you click on objects that are really, really small. You get lost. All right. So there we are. Whew. All right. So we're back on Jupiter. We'll mess with Pluto in a little bit because I don't want to mess with the flow of this too bad. But right above the horizon here, we'll see the beginnings of Saturn. So Saturn, might be a little bit biased, is one of my favorite planets just because I think it's beautiful, first of all, and it's also different because its rings are visible. Now, you heard me correctly, I did say its rings are visible, not that it has rings. And the reason for that is because pretty much every gas giant has rings of their own. The difference is that Saturn, those rings are made out of different types of like ice crystals and frozen liquid and things that basically reflect light. Whereas the rings of other planets are really just debris, rocks, dust, all that kind of stuff. So it still makes a ring in both cases, but obviously the reflection of water and frozen light and all that causes the light to travel to us where we are able to see it. So that's kind of how it's known as the ring planet, but just a little fun fact, it's not the only one. Don't mean to take away from it though. It's still very beautiful. A little bit about those rings too, to talk about just sort of what's going on with like the orbit here. If I can, I'm gonna pause this because this is getting really, really annoying. It doesn't want to stop. There we go. All right. So yeah, a little bit more about the orbit. Like I said, everything that gets caught here, like all the moons, all the debris and all that, that's just because of the gravitational pull. So if you look here in the ring itself, you'll see a few like spaces there. And that's really just because there are some smaller moons in there. They're big enough to be qualified as moons. So it's not just debris, but there are moons in there that are still in its orbit that are pushing with their own gravity, pushing away the other debris from it. So another little fun fact about the rings there. All right, so I've spent a good amount of time talking about the planets here, so let's go zoom back out to our main sky. So keep in mind that what we're looking at here is in the southeast. So remember, I'm sure those of you guys who have been staying on this series know how to find the North Star by now. So just keep in mind that if you look for the North Star, that's in the north, so just do basically a 180. It will bring you to Libra right now, but Scorpius again is the one that I like using because it's very obvious where it is and what it is. And at that point, if you go a little bit left, you'll go through Sagittarius, and then you should be able to see these two planets. These two planets, though, are the biggest ones in our solar system. They are the two gas giants, Jupiter and Saturn in that order, respectively. And because of their size, they're also really, really bright, almost brighter than some of the stars in the area. So even as early as about like 8 o'clock, when the sun is really like starting to go down and still sort of a blue sky, you will be able to see those already. So really cool stuff there. It's always nice when you can see stuff in the sky that isn't just stars. Stars are beautiful, but it's always, I think, really cool to be able to spot a planet and to know that it's a planet. So you'll see we're going to go ahead into the moon now. And that is going to be, like I said before, inside of Virgo right now. It won't be perfectly on it, but just trust me, there's like borders that go. Actually, I can probably pull those up. No, I don't want to mess with that right now, but it's going to be near Virgo and kind of on the tail of Leo here, next to Denebula. So just like with the planets, if you were to zoom in, it's going to be a realistic image of what we would see. Obviously, there's a bit of glow that hides out here, but when we zoom into the moon right now, it brings us to one of its phases, and this is actually its first quarter. So a quick little lesson about the phases. Basically, the moon is orbiting and it's spinning around. So that's what we're seeing here is basically the light from, sorry, I'm stumbling over my words. The light from the sun is hitting the moon, and based on its position and our position in the three orbits, basically gives us these phases. So if we want to go through the different ones in order, we would start with a new moon, which would basically just be a black moon, like you'd see no white, no light. And then it's going to get a little bit bigger. So it's going to give us kind of that crescent moon shape that we always see. Um, and that first crescent moon, that's going to be called a waxing crescent. So there's waxing and waning, and I'll get into that in a bit, but just think about it as waxing is the light is getting bigger. So from our crescent moon, it'll go one step up, and that will give us basically this first quarter moon that we see here. I know a lot of people are tempted to call it a half, but you have to also think that this is a sphere. So this is really only about a quarter of what we're seeing. So probably why I got that name. Of course, then we go one step forward, and then it's going to give us kind of the opposite of that crescent. So think about it as like a black crescent here with sort of an egg shape. And that egg-shaped moon is going to be called a gibbous moon, so a waxing gibbous. And of course, at that point, it's going to be one more phase forward, and that will give us a full moon. And then, of course, from that point on, it's just the same phases, but in opposite order, because it's still going to be the same kind of like the step after that will still be that egg shape, but now it's going to be on the left, whereas like that crescent dark spot will now be on the right. And so what that is called is a waning gibbous. So remember how I said waxing was when the light is growing, waning is when it's getting smaller. So we already know this is a first quarter, so that should be a third quarter. And the last phase, of course, is our waxing crescent. So, or waning crescent, my bad. So we have new moon, waxing crescent, first quarter, waxing gibbous, full moon, waning gibbous, third quarter, waning crescent. So an easy way to remember those, waxing and waning, you can think about the old Karate Kid, like the whole wax on, wax off. So when you're waxing on, it's like you're waxing on the light. So that makes sense, right? And of course, waning is just the opposite of that. I'm sure we maybe have some millennials here in the chat. So maybe you guys, this is what I taught myself when I was younger and learning this stuff. Of course, we know the rapper Lil Wayne. So that's how I remember it, is when we know that waxing is when it's getting bigger. When it's getting smaller, it's waning. So Lil Wayne. So of course, you guys can choose whichever one you like to remember that. That's just the one I use. They're both good though. And of course, that's sort of what's going on with like the moon's phases. And I'm see if I can change this where it won't drift away. Okay, well, my apologies. I'll have to figure out how that works exactly. But I want to skip about a week. You're doing the 27th, so yeah, I think that's about a week longer. Maybe days. So not perfect, but if I go ahead and look at the moon again, in about a week's time, it should have gone through two phases. So that means it is, yes, it has gone through its waxing gibbous, and now it is in its full moon stage. So quick thing, I don't want to bog you guys down with terminology, but there's this thing called a sidereal period. And that is basically the amount of time it takes for the moon to complete all of its phases, and that is about, I think, 27 point something days. And of course, we have uh, all of its phases happen within a month. So if you do like that 27 divided by 4 for the 4 weeks, that's two phases essentially. And so all that does is it means like two phases happen per week. So that's all you can remember. So we're going to have this, that's the 27th of tonight. So next week, I'm trying to do the math on my head and fly. So yeah, it should be the 4th. So next week, that should give us a full moon. So just remember that. But you'll also see that the moon is orbiting kind of in a strange way. Usually everything that goes through our ecliptic will go from left to right, but the moon is actually breaking that rule, and it's actually going from right to left. So pretty odd thing you don't see every day. All right, so at this point, what have we talked about? Let's do a quick review. So I reviewed over the ecliptic, kind of the perspective and the time period and how we know when things will pop up. We know that Leo, Virgo, and Libra are ones that you typically will see in the summer, which will give way to the winter constellations once those kind of go beyond that. Of course, the planets and the moon are also on this ecliptic, so um, I really try to like not confuse everyone by just going all over the place on the map. I really like to keep it centric because then it does a good idea that you can do what's called star hopping, and you can take one position. Let's say we found Virgo first, and then we can click here, and that will show us Spica. And so Spica is going to be really bright, so it's a really good star I think we can start with. And then since we know that that's basically going to be on the ecliptic, when we go a little bit left to the moon here, we know that we're looking in between Scorpius and Libra. So again, that's just called star hopping. It's basically using your context of what you've found already to help you find something else that maybe you're looking for that maybe may not be as bright, like Pluto, for example. All right, so I've done a lot of talking over a few different subjects, so hopefully we've had some questions. So Chrissy, do we have anything in the chat?
No, we don't have any questions.
Okay. All right, so we have no questions. Then hopefully I think I did a good job here of showing you guys kind of how everything works. Hopefully you guys learned a thing or two and are still enjoying our series. Chrissy, is there anything else you'd like to say?
Nope, just join us for trivia on Wednesday at 7.
All right. All right, everybody have a great day and happy exploring.